Hi, my name is Clint Sanel, and this is my speech on music in the church. I've always loved music. I grew up going to church, so I was exposed to many different types of worship growing up, and I've always just been fascinated by it. I've always been fascinated by how much different music is than a regular conversation. And I'm not talking about the obvious reasons that a conversation is different from music. I'm not talking about the fact that music has instruments and a beat and a rhythm and a conversation does not. I'm talking about the way we receive music, the way we receive it almost in our spirit that's so much different. I feel like we receive it with our spirit and not our ears. The power that music has to convey a message, to bring a passion, to touch your heart the way a conversation does not, has always fascinated me. When I walk into church on Saturday or Sunday, I could walk into worship feeling totally stressed out, totally cold towards God, worried about the things in this world. And as soon as I hear the worship, instantly the world just sheds off me. Music in the church has always had this way of touching me. Even when I was away from the Lord in high school, even when I'd go with my parents to church, I'd walk into worship and I'd feel almost touched by God. I just feel like my eyes start to water and I almost start to cry, even when I was away from the Lord. Music has always had this way of touching me in a way that conversation hasn't. I could listen to a pastor preach all day, but going into worship has always had this effect on me that I've always been fascinated about. Even though I'm not musically talented, I've always desired to be. I've always longed to learn an instrument, but never taken the time or the effort to actually do it. When I see the worship team on stage, I see them strumming their guitar or hitting their drums or singing out. I've always longed to have that talent. They seem to have this connection with God that I've been so curious about. When they're on stage singing praises out to God or strumming their guitar or hitting the drums, they seem to connect with God like I've never seen before. I mean, think about when you see a person, a man or a woman on stage, alone on the piano, singing praises to God, worshiping God. They seem to create this connection with God that has always been fascinating to me. It seems like they are so in tune with the Holy Spirit through their musical gift. I've always longed for this. And someone who embodied this completely is a man by the name of Keith Green. If you're not familiar with Keith Green, he's a Christian artist who rose to fame in the late 70s. Most times you saw him, he was on stage simply playing the piano and worshiping God. He had this way of connecting with God through his music that was so personal. People flocked to him because of how personal his worship was. He had this connection with God on stage that was just so fascinating. He he would touch people's hearts through his music because of how personal they were. They were never sung, "We praise you, God." There was, "I praise you, God," or "I long for you, God." It was never sung in a corporate manner. It was always so personal, and it created this connection with God that I feel we should have today in worship. In the Old Testament, we know about the temple of God. We know that in the temple there was the Holy of Holies, the most holy place where we could not enter. At this time, we were separated from God before Christ came. And there was a literal thick curtain in front of this most holy place where God's presence dwelled. Only the high priest was allowed into this place once a year. Anybody else who entered would have died immediately. This curtain represented the literal separation from presence of God. But see, when Christ came and he died on the cross, he became our sin and he took our punishment so that we didn't have to be punished for the sin, so we didn't have to be separated from God. You see, when he died on the cross, he rebuilt that bridge that was broken when when Adam and Eve first sinned in the garden. That bridge that was broken, he rebuilt by dying on the cross. The second that he breathed his last breath and said, "It is finished," the curtain in the temple tore from top to bottom, down in two. And God was simply telling us, you don't have to be separated from my presence anymore. And I feel like Keith Green had this, he knew exactly what that was all about. He knew what Christ had done and how we could go straight to God. We didn't have to go through a prophet anymore. We didn't have to go through a high priest to give our worships or praise to God. Keith Green knew that he could come straight to the Father because of what Jesus did. And his worship embodied that principle. He always sang straight to the Lord, straight to God. And people were contagious to that. It just became contagious. When you listen to his music, you just find yourself being drawn in. You can claim his words as your own, and you find yourself just in tune with the Holy Spirit automatically as soon as you start listening to the song. I think that's something that's lacking in the worship today. I feel like the worship in the church, the music in the church is becoming too corporate. I miss the old personal worship that Keith Green embodied. I feel like most of the songs that are written nowadays are created for a corporate worship environment that are kind of hard to draw yourself in at times. I could be in church and I just listen to these songs and I'm praising God, but I just don't feel connected. I always find myself waiting for that one song that's personal, and immediately I find myself just being drawn in, and immediately tears stream down my face, and I feel myself connecting with God through this personal worship. I grew up going to a church called the Valley Vineyard in Reseda, California, who Keith Green actually came up out of. So you see this theme of personal worship in this church. I grew up listening to this type of personal worship, and even though I was young, my parents took me to this church growing up, and even though I was young, I remember how powerful the worship was. I remember being touched by God even as a young boy. And so I long for this personal worship that Keith Green and the Valley Vineyard used to have. I attend Higher Vision Church in Valencia, California now, and the worship is great. It really is. I love the worship there, but it tends to be more on the praise side than the worship side. Most of the songs are created for a corporate environment, very visitor friendly, and I feel like the close personal worship is lacking in the church today. I would love to see another man like Keith Green arise in the church today and create that personal worship that I feel the church is longing for and that the church needs. Now I know that there's many different types of people in the church, and so all the different types of worship are made for many different types of people. Worship can touch people in different ways. The way I love personal worship, it could turn somebody off, or some people could be in love with the praise types of music. It just lifts their spirit. For me, I feel like the personal worship is what really aligns my spirit with God's spirit. I could walk into church and a praise song comes on, and instantly I feel happy. I love it for that. It automatically lifts your spirit, and you just feel happy and joyful. But I feel like as soon as that song turns off, the happiness almost goes away. But I feel like when that song comes on and it's so personal, and I can claim it as my own, it's somebody crying out to God as the singer is singing it out and crying out to God personally. I feel like instantly I connect with God, and it gives me that true joy, that true freedom that the praise music it lacks for me. So like I said, I know that many different types of music are created for many different types of people, but I just wanted to simply share my opinion with you. You may disagree with me, but I just wanted to share my opinion with you on music in the church today. I love music with all my heart, all types of music, but I'm longing for that Keith Green to come back and bring back that personal worship that we're missing today. But I thank you so much for listening to me, letting me share my opinion and my heart to you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.